I'm Nikolai Dembrow. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Physiology and Biophysics. So I study neurons and how they integrate and transmit information. I've been very interested in understanding how different neuron types contribute to the processing and behaviors that animals produce. When the brain's pretty complicated, and so we often come up with ways of comparing it to something we know and how it works. And so, right, these days, the thing we compare it to is a computer. And so we know that the pieces in the brain are doing mathematical calculations that allow us to do some of these amazing things, not just us, but all animals, to do these amazing behaviors. And so computational neuroscience is a way of describing the underlying functions and computations that these components are doing. I'm lucky enough to be hired by the VA Epilepsy Center of Excellence. And in that job, I'm a basic science researcher. So, basic sounds it's not necessarily always a good term for people, right? They're like, oh, well, that's very basic. But what it really means is fundamental, understanding the pieces and how they work with an eye towards making things that will, unexpected discoveries, right? That are going to result in paradigm shifts that'll improve care. So, epilepsy in the veteran population and many different populations is often untreatable and somewhat mysterious. There's many different ways that epilepsy can occur. It can be acquired in adulthood, or it can be something that occurs with development due to gene mutations or an insult at a very young age. So, one of the things that I strongly believe in is that you're going to make really important discoveries, unexpected discoveries, by doing basic research. So I think that obviously we need to continue to do translational work, so with an eye towards understanding how the neurons and the nervous system is working in order to prevent epilepsy, and also clinical research, which studies epilepsy in all its forms with an eye towards treatment. But basic science is absolutely necessary in order for us to, change the way we treat these diseases. So, for example, about 30% of people with temporal lobe epilepsy are what we call medically refractory, which means the epilepsy seizure control is poor. And that number, unfortunately, hasn't changed over the last few decades, even with the discovery of all these, new drugs. And part of that is because probably what's going to be necessary to really improve the lives of that last 30% is going to be a paradigm shift. And I think basic science is going to be the source of where that shift occurs. So that's why I choose that over, say, clinical research. I use coding for several different things. So first of all, I have very sophisticated machinery that I need to control with incredible temporal precision. And so I use MATLAB to write code that then results in controlling these machines that do these impressive tiny little things under the microscope. Controlling where a laser is pointing, controlling how much electricity is being injected down a wire that will then drive a neuron to be active or not active. So I use coding for that. I also use coding in programs including Igor Pro, and also in MATLAB to analyze the data that I collect, which is really complicated because it's a combination of changes in brightness in a cell, depending on whether a dye is bound to calcium or not, as well, in conjunction with the electrical activity that I'm recording from the cell. So all of this combined is really complicated and cumbersome, and I could probably make an Excel sheet to do it, but it would take forever. So I do make code to make my job easier. So that's one thing. The other thing, I use code in both MATLAB and Igor, as well as this really cool simulation program called Neuron, which simulates the complexity of a neuron's shape and turns it into little simple cylinders in order to understand how electrical signals propagate along this structure. So I use those three programs to do simulations of my neurons that I record from and networks of these neurons that I record from to sort of understand higher order principles that would be perhaps difficult to test experimentally. So I'll do a complicated examination of things in this model space and then use the results of that simulation to make predictions about the experiments that I can then prove. And if my experiments validate the model, then I'm on the right track, and if they come up with unexpected results, well, then I need to go back to the model and change it and figure out what maybe I had gotten wrong. So that's sort of the second big, well, I guess third big thing I use. So for acquiring data, for analyzing data, and then for simulating. And recently, I've been blessed to be collaborating with the Allen Brain Institute, where we collect the mRNA data from these cells that I record from. And that's thousands, tens of thousands of genes and how much they're expressed. And to analyze this really complicated code, we typically use Python because there's just a much better base of information in how to analyze this more complicated data set. One way that we tried to correct this issue was by inviting speakers who perhaps weren't the set that were proposed to me by the champions of the field, but were nevertheless excellent researchers in their own right who hadn't gotten maybe the attention that they deserved. And so that was a very gratifying experience because some of those people have gone on to do really excellent work, and I'd like to think that getting a chance to be in the spotlight was helpful to them. The other thing is, on my as one of my jobs, I review grants, and sometimes I do have translational and clinical research that crosses my path. And so I'll be reading a grant that's about epilepsy or ways maybe to detect seizures in epilepsy, and I see the population of people who are part of that cohort. And one thing that is very clear is that there is an underrepresentation of patient groups, depending upon their background. And that is another way in which you really want to hold researchers to task. I mean, they can only work with the data that's provided to them, but to remind them that it is worth expanding the scope of who you're collecting data from, because often there can be populations who, for very legitimate reasons, are hesitant to participate in the studies. But you need to make good faith efforts to try and expand that scope so that you're not just treating one population. Well, I mean, I guess I was alluding to this before, but the thing that has really, the gift that neuroscience has given me is the wonderful people that I get to interact with, right? So, my friends all the way back from graduate school to current day, I've get to meet profoundly interesting people. And so neuroscience has really made my life interesting by virtue of the people who study it. That's been one way in which it's made my life, including my partner, so my wife, met at graduate school. We met at graduate school, and we're both neuroscientists, very different kinds of neuroscientists, although both biological focused. It's been an absolute gift. One of the ways in which neuroscience has changed how I see things is that I'm often thinking about how it is that when I'm experiencing or perceiving or conceptualizing something, what's happening in my brain? Like, what is mediating this? And how do these amazing things that I get to study in the lab space, how do they connect to the experiences that I'm having? So I think it's a little vague, but it's always fun to realize that the perception that you see of the world is a construct, largely, of that process that's occurring. Yeah, so I wouldn't say I'm a very artistic or creative person in the classic sense, like when I'm making pieces of art like that. I like making figures. I like making figures for my papers, graphical descriptions of what I'm, thinking or doing, or what the results of my data are. I also very much enjoy just doodling, to sort of de-stress. I find that very useful. Some motor activity that is sort of not directed. No, I don't think so. I think we covered it comprehensively. I'm excited to talk with people. I think that's going to be a lot of fun at the evening for neuroscience. I'm curious to hear what the other panelists, as well as the questions that people have. I'm excited to chat.